Gold and silver are wealth, and they've been wealth for 6,000 years. We are seeing a transition away from a system based on trust of a currency that has the fiscal responsibility of a third grader loaded up on chocolate. We're 200 trillion in the hole. We don't make anything. We are seeing billions and billions worth of metal stand for delivery every single month. This never, ever happened. Who's got that kind of money? It's probably the Treasury Department, where they do not need congressional approval. They can be stealth about it because it's all about national security. And when governments start to stockpile, the scramble for real stuff has begun. When you're spending hundreds of billions of dollars, you're not effing around. You know where the ball is going. They're admitting at the highest level that critical minerals are not readily available. If you are not a contrarian right now, you're going to be a victim. If you save in dollars, you're destined to go broke. There is no way out of paying up the indebtedness that we have accumulated. Just like Andy Dufresne had to crawl through 2 miles of shit to get to the other end, so too do we.
World War III is already happening.
This is a house of cards, and it is in the process of collapsing right now.
You're going to see an economic crash, the likes of which we've never seen.
Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. Long before the Asian AI bot rebellion, there was today's guest, Andy Schectman, a longtime figure in the precious metal space and the CEO of Miles Franklin, which has achieved billions in sales over its 35-year history. And I presume a significant amount in the last year or so. Andy's known for his measured, non-sensational, data-driven insights into the physical gold and silver market, grounded in a macro view of risk, liquidity, and how real-world constraints and psychology shape price behavior. Now, I've been listening to you for a long time, and as I was telling you before we started, it's nice to have a sober, more measured voice in this space, because oftentimes it seems as though there's a lot of alarmism and shock jockery. And I've always found that you've brought a very even keel perspective, despite the fact that, of course, I mean, with any metals dealer, I mean, there's a little bit of a conflict of interest there, but we'll talk a little bit about that, because I think you give a fair and balanced perspective on these things. But I was hoping today that you can explain to my audience your macroeconomic view, and let's start broadly with, why do you think gold and silver are going up in price in the way that they have for the last 2 years? Let's start there.
Well, first of all, I appreciate being here. I appreciate the kind words. And I do want to talk about that perception of conflict of interest. It's always something that I found interesting. But as far as why are gold and silver going up, because gold and silver are wealth, and they've been wealth for 6,000 years, through 2 world wars, German hyperinflation, the Great Depression, every pandemic, everything. Mentioned cumulatively over 700 times in the Bible thousands of years ago. Here we are coming full circle, where for the last several years, the most well-informed traders on the planet, now set aside the fact that they're the most well-funded, the central banks have been on a buying spree. And I think it has a lot to do with trust, a system that once was backed by gold, a system now that is backed by trust, or the full faith and credit of, for example, the world reserve currency of the United States. Let's talk about faith. You know, we look at what has happened over the last several years under the previous administration. I would constantly say what is happening is too stupid to be stupid. I am a patriot. I thank God every day I was born in this country. I do. And the things that we saw under the previous administration, the lawlessness, the open borders, the perception of election interference, of a 2-tiered justice system, of meritocracy being thrown out the window for lifestyle. I come from a household where my parents were hippies. I was a jock who grew up in a house of hippies. I understand lifestyle, but it's a whole different ball of wax now. So is being liberal. Back then it was sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Now it's a whole different thing. And I rallied against it. I talked about it. It really bothered me that it was too stupid to be stupid. Anyways, we come full circle, and we see a world who looks at the United States, a country that is fiscally irresponsible, creating $1 trillion of debt every 100 days. Now, 1 trillion seconds ago was 31,688 years ago. It's no small number. It's a big number. And we are throwing caution to the wind in terms of our fiscal responsibility and just printing money like there is no end to it. At the same time, we have done things like weaponize the treasury market against countries like Russia. Now, I'm not passing judgment on the war in the Ukraine, but when a country like ours goes into Iraq 22 years ago, topples the regime, destroys the country, and is still there occupying it 22 years later after not finding the weapons that they were looking for, that they told the world, obviously Saddam has weapons of mass destruction, never did, never said we're sorry, and we're still there. The point is, the world looks at us as being hypocritical for being able to pass judgment, for being able to be the judge, jury, and executioner. And as the issuer of the world reserve currency, arguably it's not for us to do those things. So as a result, we are seeing, if it were a word, we are seeing de-treasurization. We hear all about de-dollarization, and that's true. You see much of the global south setting up payment systems outside the dollar, using the SIPS, the Cross Interbank Payment System, or the M-Bridge. These are vehicles that allow movement of money outside of the purview of the SWIFT system to be able to settle in local currencies. And instead of using treasuries to hold reserves and to settle imbalances, they are using gold. It is a new system moving away from dollar dominance, moving away from the hegemony of a country who for a long time has been wayward in its ideology, in its culture, being whitewashed, going around the world with a stick, imposing rules and sanctions when our house, perhaps fiscally, morally, spiritually, all of these things that are important are in disarray. And so we are seeing a move away from I believe, globalism. We're seeing a move away from a reliance on one currency to settle everything from oil to daily transactions, and moving towards a system that is more about mercantilism, where every country is taking care of their own monetary ecosystem. And instead of using the U.S. Treasury and the U.S. dollar, they're using their own currencies and gold. And this has been something I've been screaming about for 5 years, and it's beginning to get, I think, far more obvious. I think we haven't seen anything yet, because it's now transitioned to the most well-informed traders here in North America, whoever the hell is doing it, is standing for delivery for millions and millions and millions of ounces of gold and silver every single month. And this is something we've never seen before. Here on COMEX in New York, things are changing. But the macro picture is simply this. If you are not a contrarian right now, you're going to be a victim. If you save in dollars, you're destined to go broke. And I think the macro picture is a move away from holding your assets in dollars and treasuries into things like gold and silver, which are tangible, which are assets that are not simultaneously someone else's liability, no counterparty risk. And that's what we're seeing at the highest level, and even out down here under the retail level in terms of selling precious metals to the public.
It's interesting you say that with respect to the transition from a globalist to a more mercantile economy, because I think it was yesterday there were Chinese officials who were allegedly urging banks to limit their purchase of U.S. bonds. And that was interesting because I think that was like the first kind of official directive that was given, and that's according to Bloomberg. So is this the beginning of the end of that relationship? I mean, we know that trade with China is down significantly. I think trade volumes are significantly down from where they were just 5 years ago. And in the past month, I believe they're down another 7%. What do you think is fomenting here with respect to this bifurcation? Is this going to be the end of that? And how deep do you think that selling will go in terms of China selling bonds?
Yeah, I think it's the beginning of the end. Absolutely. I mean, first of all, China had close to $3 trillion in bonds, and they're down to under $700 billion. They were number 1 or 2, and now they're number 3 or 4 in terms of the amount of treasuries that are being held. But I'll give you an example of how things are changing with both dollars and treasuries. You know, China is setting up the rails right now of the BRICS, but they're calling it the internationalization of the yuan. And what they are doing is kind of twofold. First, they made digital yuan transactions, which are pretty much central bank to central bank, immediately convertible into gold on the Shanghai Gold Exchange without converting to dollars. They're expanding their Shanghai network, and the first one that just finished completion was in Hong Kong. And the reason that that's relevant is that when gold leaves China, it has to leave out of Hong Kong. So let's just do an exercise here. They built two things. One is the CIPS, the Cross Interbank Payment System, and the other is mBridge. mBridge is the cross-border payment system that was built by China, Hong Kong, Thailand, the United Arab Emirates, and then later into the game, Saudi Arabia. Which allows, whether it be either CIPS or mBridge, the cross-border movement of money using central bank digital currencies free from SWIFT intervention. So if, for example, China were to buy oil from Saudi Arabia, pay for it in digital yuan, Saudi Arabia can take the digital yuan and hold it if they want, or send it immediately back without converting to dollars, convert into gold, take possession out of Hong Kong through the Shanghai Gold Exchange expansion. Now they're expanding it throughout the entire Belt Road Initiative, which is the largest infrastructure project in human history. And it's combining Asia, Africa, South America, parts of Europe through bridges and roads and railways and maritime channels and all this kind of stuff. But the second vault is being built in no other than Saudi Arabia. And they will expand these vaults all throughout the Belt Road, multi-jurisdictional, so countries can trade their local currencies, which chips away at the dollar transaction status or the ability to no longer settle trade in dollars, chips away at that tremendously. And if you don't hold all of these dollars because, you're not settling in dollars, you don't have to hold as many, then you don't need to put it into treasuries, those excess reserves. Instead, they're putting it into gold, which chips away at the reserve status. But I'll give you an example of how big it's becoming. Quietly, don't tell anybody, because the media does an absolute horseshit job of telling anybody what's happening. I'll give you an example. China has signed up the countries under the acronym of ASEAN, which are the countries in Southeast Asia. There are 800 million people, twice the population of the United States. They are China's largest trading partner by far, about 30% of global GDP in and of themselves. And they are now all signed up to trade outside the dollar system using the digital yuan. And so they will settle transactions or trade in dollars, which chips away at the dollar settlement status. And they will instead, because they have far less dollars now, so instead of putting those dollars in treasuries as the way they always did, which lowered our interest rates, put our asset prices up high, made the goods we buy at Walmart cheap, this is beginning to be less and less and less. So instead of loading up on treasuries, they'll load up on gold, which is being used throughout all of these countries as the settlement status or as the reserve status to settle imbalances in trade and in currency. The entire premise, of the unit settlement token, which is already operational on mBridge throughout these countries, the whole premise of it is using local currencies and settling imbalances in gold instead of treasuries and dollars. And that is accelerating. And the fact that the media doesn't talk about it, the first I've heard about it is Senator Cynthia Lummis of Wyoming, who asked Treasury Secretary Bissett just the other day in congressional hearings, is China preparing a digital currency to push back against the United States? And the answer is yes, they are. But it was interesting watching his reaction. It was an outright, yeah, they are, but I'm lying. I'm saying, no, we don't know. The point of it is that we are seeing a transition away from a system based on trust of a currency that has the fiscal responsibility of a third grader loaded up on chocolate and, zero fiscal responsibility. And at the same time, going around the world and imposing sanctions, or we call them tariffs, but they're actually sanctions masquerading as tariffs because tariffs are used to protect manufacturing. And a lot of these things are, well, if you do this, then we're going to put 150% tariff on you. That's not a tariff, that's a sanction. So we go around the world with a stick. Our morals are questionable, and our fiscal responsibility is putrid. And you put it all together with a $200 trillion debt because, the 38 trillion we talk about, how about Medicare and Medicaid and Social Security and government and military pensions, which are off balance sheet, are 150 or 60 trillion. We're 200 trillion in the hole. We don't make anything. Our manufacturing's gone. We have Ray Dalio just gave a speech and said the reading proficiency in the United States, 60% of the country has that of the 6th grade or less. So we're uneducated, we're broke, we don't make anything, and here comes AI just in time to upset the apple cart. So things are beginning to happen both here to address that. I believe what President Trump is doing is trying to address that, and across the globe saying, why the hell do we want to sell our goods for dollars which are being inflated away, and then put reserves in treasuries, which are also performing poorly and can be taken if they don't agree with us? So yeah, there is a transition happening right out from underneath us. But if all you do is follow the mainstream, you'll never know it. I spend 3-4 hours a day, 7 days a week reading websites from all around the world that tell a much clearer picture of the way the world is not only de-dollarizing, but here again, made up word, de-treasurizing, which is the bigger deal because it is the treasuries that have given us this standard of living where interest rates have been low, asset prices high, and goods cheap. This is all changing right now, right out from underneath us.
Wow. That was an epic breakdown. A lot to unpack there. So you talked about this tokenized yuan, which is backed by gold. And it's interesting because Besant, I think he also stated the other day that the gold and silver markets were fueled by Chinese speculation. And that was on the back of, I believe it was Jerome Powell talking about how the price of gold didn't matter. And I think you said earlier that being a contrarian is kind of the winning approach to take this day and age, and everything they say, do the opposite. And that seems to ring true here in that if they are backing this digital currency by gold and presuming they're only going to gain a bigger and bigger market share, then they're going to have to continue to acquire the physical stuff. And that's going to put a lot of demand pressure on the markets. And yeah, it's just interesting, the gaslighting that kind of is happening right now by the Treasury and all of the financial officials in the United States. Do you think that Kevin Warsh, that this is a fake out? Do you think that the new select Fed chair is going to be bullish or bearish, or is this just setting people up for the next round of money printing?
Yeah, I mean, I think, the market reacted to him being such a hawk. If you don't think President Trump squeezed him where he doesn't want to be squeezed before he became his nominee, if he didn't vet him, I got a bridge to sell you. And I think his hawkishness is more along the lines of cleaning up the Fed balance sheet more than anything. In other words, you can clean up the Fed balance sheet and the stupidity in the way that we've conducted monetary policy, and at the same time, that can coexist with, in other words, you can shrink the balance sheet, but at the same time, you don't have to jack up policy rate. You can keep interest rates low or even lower interest rates while at the same time having fiscal or monetary responsibility. And I think that's what this is. And it is kind of a fake out. I think it's more about restructuring the Fed than crushing inflation with rate hikes. And I think that was something, obviously, President Trump would not have nominated anybody who was going to fly in the face of what he wants to do. You look at the Genius Act, and the Genius Act, which is coming into effect next year, will keep interest rates low on the front end of the curve, synthetically. And there's not much the Fed can do legally about the back end of the curve. They're only allowed to control the front end. Well, the Genius Act, if you don't know much about it, you should look into it and read about it. The whole premise of the Genius Act is every time money moves, it will be backed by 90-day or less short-term treasuries. Anytime you buy a pack of cigarettes or a new house, it's going to be backed by stablecoin. You'll never write out a check again. You'll never send a wire. Money will move like that, like Venmo. And when the stablecoins are moved, it's created. If I owe you $1,000, I'm going to send it to you. The stablecoin is created. When you receive it, the stablecoin dies, blows up, burned. The backing of that stablecoin are 90-day or less treasuries, short-term treasuries, 1-to-1. Backing it, it's synthetic demand for the short-term treasury, pushes interest rates low synthetically, which leads me into what I believe they are doing to bring back manufacturing, which we can talk about if you want. But the bottom line is interest rates are going to be synthetically kept low. I don't think we have to worry about him being this hawkish guy who's going to try to raise rates. The Genius Act will put an end to that in and of itself through the movement of money. But I do think that if you want to make America great, you have to start by getting your house in order and stop with this ridiculous fiscal and monetary irresponsibility. Bringing a guy like this in, if he said, fine, I'll do that and I won't mess with interest rates, we'll just start cleaning up the waste and the irresponsibility that we've seen. Well, that would be a good way to start in my mind. And there's not a chance in hell that he would have brought someone on who said, no, rates are going higher, period. I just think that's a nice cover for what he's trying to do and might actually inspire some credibility along the way.
What do you make of this like concerted effort to, diminish the relevance of the metals? Because we have the Bank of America warning about a bubble-like price action in gold and silver. We have those statements that I referenced earlier. And we also have this PSYOP with these AIs that seem to be, I'm not sure what their purpose is. Are they bullish? Are they bearish? But they seem to be a harbinger for future widespread market manipulation. I think that's just the beginning of what's going to become a real problem. And what's most unnerving is the credulity of a lot of people who are just watching it and treating it as though it's fact and anthropomorphizing it and really consulting it for advice. Not perhaps aware that they could be potentially being manipulated. We've seen the media, every time gold hits a new high, they speak about it in a negative. They talk about how it's getting kind of toppy. They called all kinds of attention to this very violent crash that we've seen recently, but they didn't really talk much about the run-up. And now all of a sudden, when gold and silver are finally making their generational move, we have these AIs coming on the scene, directing everybody. And they're getting this algorithmic traction that real people like myself and you don't seem to get. Like, it seems like there really is some kind of concerted effort to suppress this information.
Let me try to answer all those. First of all, as far as the banks, it's funny that Bank of America would say that. They're full of crap is what they are. They also hold massive short positions in gold and silver, which a lot of people feel that's what this last pullback was about, addressing this. But I will simply say this. Their lead analyst, Michael Hartnett, whose newsletter is in the tens of thousands of dollars, goes only to the institutional traders. This is a guy who said the 60-40 mentality, or the platform that Wall Street has used for the last 50 years, is broken. It should not be 60 stock, 40 bonds anymore. It should be 25% stock, 25% bonds, 25% short-term treasuries, 25% precious metals. Here you have their lead analyst saying 25% should be in precious metals. You have the chief investment officer for Morgan Stanley who said 60-40 is broken, should be 60-20-20, sell half your bonds, buy gold. You have Jeffrey Gundlach, the bond king, who spent his entire life, his entire career selling bonds, getting the moniker the bond king. The antithesis of gold, which pays no interest. He says 25% in precious metals is not overweight. So I don't believe that. The banks are the ones that are off sides. You look at the run-up you talked about, the mainstream media, who just is absolutely pathetic. You are far more real news than what you see on any of the mainstream news channels. You mentioned they miss it. They missed everything, right? They may say, yeah, gold and silver are really high. You're right. They say it's toppy, it's overweight, it's overbought, and be careful, it's a bubble. All of that is bullshit. None of that matters. The only question that matters is that since November of last year, not a year and a half ago, when President Trump won the election, every single month for the past 15, 16 months, every single month, we are seeing billions and billions and billions and billions and billions of worth of metal stand for delivery. This never, ever, ever happened. Never. So let's talk about silver first, and we'll talk about gold. Like, for example, in December, after they raised margins twice, before Christmas and after Christmas, to shake out all of the speculation, right? What happened? Well, we had the largest December delivery of silver ever in the history of the COMEX market, which has been around since 1974. 63 million ounces of silver stood for delivery. 63 million. But every single month we've been between 40 and 70 million ounces of silver every single month. Who's doing this? It's as unusual as 4 feet of snow in Death Valley in July. And I guarantee you if that happened, you are not going to see snowmobile dealerships pop up in Death Valley. It's an anomaly. This is an anomaly. Nobody ever stood for delivery. I've been doing this 36 years. 1 out of 100 contracts stood for delivery. Now you're seeing massive delivery, not just here, but in London, because the people who get this understand that we have held down the price of gold and silver. 2 reasons. Gold, something called Gibson's paradox, the inverse relationship between real interest rates and gold. You suppress interest rates, you got to step on gold. Silver, the military-industrial complex needs massive amounts of silver to make high-tech weaponry. From cruise missiles to F-35s to submarines to stealth bombers, huge amounts of silver, and they create these things and sell them all around the world. If they are going to do that, they need to step on the price of silver. Period. This is why 8 Western banks, 2 in Canada, and we're going to talk about TD Bank in a second, and a few in Europe and 5 in the United States have created the largest concentrated short position of any commodity ever traded in the 1,000+ commodities on the COMEX. Ever. The largest concentrated short position by 8 Western banks stepping on silver. Why? Because the West has ruled the world through military prowess forever. So the rest of the world, those in the BRICS said, we see what you're doing. Here's how we beat you. We stand for delivery. Because all of these contracts allow a delivery mechanism. No one ever did it. But now if we do that, let's see how good your game is when we stand for delivery. In London, as an example, there's 2 billion ounces in outstanding contracts that could stand for delivery versus 140 million ounces of silver. What could possibly go wrong? Here in the United States for the March contract right now, which the first day of delivery is February 27th, there is 4 times the amount of paper than there are bars in the registered category. There's 100 million, let me give you the exact number. I don't want to screw this one up. There is right now for the month of December, 402 million ounces of paper exposure tied to March. There's about 80,500 COMEX contracts open. It's called open interest, right? And the first day of notice for delivery is February 27th. So for the March contract right now, about 80,500 contracts open that could stand for delivery. Each contract is 5,000 ounces. That's 402 million ounces. Compared to what's actually sitting in the COMEX vaults, 103.5 million ounces of registered silver. What could possibly go wrong? They have held down the price of silver for military prowess. Now, what has happened is that the countries around the world say, we're going to stand for delivery. That is what is changing things. But the point I'm getting at is that nobody stood for delivery. So when you talk about a media missing something, what they have missed is not the price. It is not the, it's overvalued. Oh, it's oversold. Oh, look at how high it's gone. None of that's all bullshit. What matters is the people who are doing this started with the central banks 4 or 5 years ago. In all my videos, I've talked about it, but it never happened here. And now since Trump won the election, not only are they doing this in silver, they're doing it in gold every single month. Billions and billions and billions and billions standing for delivery never happened. The fact that the media doesn't say, not one person says, who the hell is doing this? And where's it all going? And who's got the pockets deep enough to do this? That is the only thing that matters. Period. In my opinion.
Contrary to popular belief, in the apocalypse, most people aren't going to die by the hands of marauders. In fact, you're probably going to die from disease. This is why you need antibiotics. The problem is, getting them requires a prescription. Well, today's sponsor is Jace Medical. They've created a revolutionary service that allows you to get prescription medications like antibiotics with relative ease, hassle-free. This will be worth more than gold in an emergency for somebody who needs them. So do yourself a favor and take your prepping to the next level while you still can. Check out the link in the description below. And now, back to the video.
Do you think that that is partly related to the fact that countries are seeing this mercantile threat
and they're actually getting prepared to kind of go it alone and just decouple from the petrodollar system. Is that really what this is about? Is it all about the threats of tariffs? Because I know that there was at one point a lot of people or countries wanting to repatriate their gold, and is this delivery more tied to like retail sales and photovoltaics? What does the pie look like in terms of, where exactly this allocation of metals is heading to in your perspective?
Well, I mean, photovoltaic is a big deal. That's solar panels, military, artificial intelligence. I mean, everything that silver is needed for. I think it's a realization that he or she who has the commodities wins. Now, let's go back to silver for a moment. Every month for 16 months, we're seeing billions and billions and billions and billions and billions and billions and billions delivered to COMEX. Never happened before. And a lot of it leaving. Who's doing it? Where is it going? Who's buying it? Do you think there's any coincidence that after all of that, oh, by the way, silver is now a critical mineral. Oh, and by the way, we are going to put state government-sponsored price floors underneath it. And guess what? Here comes Project Vault. Project Vault says, we're also going to buy a strategic stockpile for the U.S. government. Oh, that's coincidence, isn't it? It's just like you mentioned the banks repatriating. I started talking about that in 2017. When I started talking about it and when I was doing a lot of public speaking, I said, why is the German Bundesbank making such a big deal about repatriating their gold, right? After 3 years of them not getting it, they put an ad in the Wall Street Journal, said, give us back our damn gold. Within a few weeks of that happening, the Bank of Austria, Hungary, Turkey, Poland, the Czech National Bank, the Dutch National Bank, they all said the same thing, not only to the New York Fed, but to the Bank of England. Why those two institutions? For 50 plus years, gold has been held at the New York Fed and the Bank of England to give access in England to the LBMA and in New York to the COMEX. They all said, give us back our gold. Now, here's what's interesting. I'm talking about front running, like I just mentioned with silver. All this silver comes in and, oh, by the way, it's now a critical mineral. So with gold, all of the banks repatriated their gold in 2017. In 2018, and this is after 6 years of the price falling and mall selling. In 2018, those same banks that repatriated their gold, as you mentioned, which is true, they bought more gold as a group than they did in the 60 years previously combined. The next year, 2019, they doubled it. And then just by some magic stroke of luck, the Bank of International Settlements, which is the central bank, said, by the way, gold is now a tier 1 reserve asset. Oh, that's convenient since we just massively bought it and repatriated it all. And they've been buying it ever since. Now, what had never happened during those 5 years or so was the U.S. doing it. Since Trump won the election, someone got in his ear and said, if we don't join this parade, we're dead. And every single month, now unabated, billions are coming in gold and silver every month. And not 1 ounce of journalistic integrity outside of guys like you and I, not one mainstream commentator, Jim Idiot Cramer. Where the hell are you, Jim? Asking these questions. None of them are. They don't do anything but foment divisiveness. They don't help you. They don't see the truth. And all they see is a negative print or it's overbought or the technicals look bad. How about none of that matters when the people who are the most well-informed and well-funded traders on the planet find it, interestingly enough, they find it important enough to stand for delivery every month nonstop since Trump won for billions and billions and billions and billions of gold and silver. Now, to me, that's all you need to know. And when you realize that they were doing this and then just by miraculously somehow silver was called a critical mineral, there is no miraculous. Just like the central banks knew, they were told by the BIS, start bringing home your gold, start buying it, it's going to be called tier 1. These things that have been happening at that level, they don't mess around. When you're spending hundreds of billions of dollars, you're not effing around, right? You know where the ball is going. Like Gretzky, he didn't skate to the puck, he skated to where the puck was going. And that's exactly what the most well-informed traders on the globe are showing you. They use price as a wonderful tool of misdirection. And when you talk about the sell-off that we saw by raising margins higher and higher and higher and higher, the margin rates, meaning how much you have to have in a margin account to control a contract, right? Christmas Day, it was $21,000 for me to control a 5,000 ounce silver contract. I normally have 2 million ounces of silver in my warehouse, so I will sell 2 million ounces on paper, right? So as one goes up, one goes down. I'm market neutral. Don't speculate with my inventory that I have from my company. But now it's $54,000 to hedge 5,000 ounces. If you don't have $50 million in a margin account, you're not keeping a big inventory. That is squeezing not only the industry and the refiners who have metal that they have within the system that they're refining, and the price moving up so fast and the margins moving up so fast, they're getting margin called. They can't take any new business. Or the big companies like me who have to put more in the margin, more into margin, more into margin, more into margin, just to hold an inventory. They're squeezing those traders who think that they're wealthy enough to trade with the sovereign wealth funds, the national or the governments, and companies like Tesla and Samsung and Sony. And they realize very quickly when the margin rates go way, 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 way higher, just like that, they're in the wrong sandbox. And what happens? The price collapses. And guess what? The people that are standing for delivery, they're not using margin at that level. These are the wealthiest players in the world who say, thank you for the 40% drop. We will stand for delivery. And that's exactly what we've seen continuously. So this is a game where price is misdirecting. Look at what the biggest money in the world is doing. They do not do this if they don't know where the puck is ultimately going.
So do you predict then that this will be a bigger delivery month than last month because of this price crash?
The February delivery, I'm not sure, are still very significant, but the delivery month for March is setting up to be extraordinary. Really is. It's setting up to be extraordinary, where there's 4 times as many contracts as there are bars backing it. So yes, I think it will be a massive delivery month. But like I've said, every month since a year ago, November, when he won the election, it's been between 40 and 70 million ounces of silver every single month, and between, 2 and 6 million ounces of gold every month. Now do the math. Who's got that kind of money? You're in the billions in both gold and silver every month, every single month. And no one is saying who's doing it. And it's as unusual as anything you can think of. I mean, anything as an anomaly, like a 4-leaf clover just pops and falls into your hand. That is how unusual these deliveries are. And it's being exploited by much of the world who understands what we've been doing. And now the big money in the United States has caught wind of it and is doing the exact same thing. And I believe it's probably the Treasury Department acting on behalf of the Exchange Stabilization Fund, where they do not need congressional approval. They can be stealth about it because it's all about national security. And to me, that's the only player big enough to be doing this.
So you think that they're amassing a physical stockpile in anticipation of something? I mean, data
Yes.
centers, obviously that's a big driver. Photovoltaics.
Same with gold as well. Same with gold.
Right.
But yes, they are. And Project Vault, which just came about, says we are going to make a stockpile of all of the critical minerals. Silver was added to the critical mineral list. Absolutely, that's what they're going to do. And in terms of putting government-sponsored price floors underneath it, which I'm not a big fan of, I think any governmental intervention is bad. However, they're doing that to incentivize domestic mining. Because of all the silver, 6 years in a row of 200 million plus ounces of shortfall between supply and demand. And silver, the majority of the silver that comes to market, about 80% of it, comes from byproduct mining. So last year there was 850 million ounces mined. Only about 150 or 70 million ounces came from companies that mine silver, like First Majestic. The rest of it came from companies mining copper, lead, or zinc and stumble across it. And so the low-lying fruit, like your skin is called epidermis, epithermal is where silver is found. You can see it in some mines. You'd see it right on the surface. You'd see it. And it's near the surface. Big deposits were found forever ago. So in order to incentivize domestic mining, you have to put the floor high enough to make it so these miners can make money. And I would guess that's going to be north of $40 would be my guess where they put it. But you will never see $30 silver again would be my guess. And I think, quite frankly, it should be a whole hell of a lot higher if it were not for the overt manipulation where 8 banks have held the largest concentrated short position in any commodity ever traded. Now, let's talk about, real quick, article in the Economic Times, which was supported by the COMEX's own data. The Commitment of Traders report said that the banks in the United States, the 5 banks, flip-flopped and went net long. Net long meaning there's more long than short. Now, they still add short. And a lot of people think that this clubbing that we saw was to get those banks that were offsides and getting killed on the price going up on their shorts to cover. Now, what's interesting is that the article more or less said what Tom Luongo has been saying for a long time, that this is going to leave the banks in Canada and in Europe on the hook for these massive short positions, and that they're going to get screwed by this. And Trump is doing it purposely to get back for what he believes is the perception of election interference. And it was attributed to the European aristocrats. Now, that's his theory, but my point is simply this. TD Bank is offsides. TD Bank has a big short position. Now, what did they do a few weeks ago? They published to all of their traders and to their big clients that we think the silver run is over. It's topped. It's going to $40, and we're placing a huge short position. Within 5 days, they were closed out at $92 because the market went the other way at a huge loss. They had to close out that trade. They were stopped out. This is a game that will end very badly for those traders that are on the wrong side of it. So I just think that what you are seeing right now is jockeying, if you will, to not be on the wrong side of what is a global shift from paper promises running headlong into give me the real thing. And if you don't have the real thing, if there's a failure to deliver, the systemic chain reaction is massive, because all the banks in Europe that are doing this, like TD Bank in Canada, like UBS, like Deutsche Bank, all of the Standard Charter, all of these European banks, they're not just in gold and silver. They're in every piece. They have their finger in every pie across the globe, from Forex to equities to bonds, you name it. You see a failure to deliver, the systemic chain reaction would be horrendous. And to see the 5 U.S. banks who have been doing this in conjunction with the European and Canadian banks for 30 years decide to flip-flop, what does that mean? And what would that look like if there was a problem? And could it be the March delivery, where there's way more contracts than bars in both London and the U.S.? I don't know. Could be, maybe. I wouldn't want to be on the wrong side of it, I'll tell you that much.
It's interesting you say that, because TD is one of the biggest sellers of physical metal here in Canada, as far as I know. They've been very busy, as I'm sure you have as of recent. So at what point does this reach a breaking point then? Because we've seen the lack of circuit breaker flipping on the way down, but there were all kind of glitches and circuit breakers flipped on the way up.
Isn't that interesting?
Is there a point in this game of musical chairs where we can maybe peg down exactly how much shortfall of delivery that is going to cause a real problem? And one of my central concerns has always been, when I see wild run-ups in these asset groups with very large capitalizations go up too fast, somebody's on the losing side of the trade, and it creates all kinds of market instability. I got worried that this was a harbinger for just a broader market sell-off when I started to see silver rip like that, because those banks got to make that up somewhere, or the people on the other side of that trade got to make it up somewhere. But where do you think the point of capitulation will be, and will we see new highs in these metals in the near term?
I wouldn't be surprised to see new high by March in silver. Look, I mean, demand is rising for all this stuff, and supply is constrained. And now you're beginning to see the world treat things like silver more like a strategic input rather than just a piece of metal. They're admitting at the highest level that critical minerals are not readily available, and that the U.S. and some of these other banks are too exposed. That's why you build reserves. You don't stockpile because you've got an abundance. You build it because you see scarcity risk and geopolitical choke points. I think the world is moving to a place where raw materials are treated as strategic assets, not commodities. And when governments start to stockpile, to me the message is simple, and that is that the scramble for real stuff has begun, period. And that's what this is all about. So the breaking point is where there runs a problem between paper promises and the ability to deliver. Bernie Madoff is a perfect example of that. He ran, everyone thought, a great show, making monthly big checks, until someone said, I need my money back. And then they said, I need my money back. And I need we have a problem. Well, the same thing is true here. And what starts out as a slow trickle turns into an all-out sprint. And we're not there yet. But I do think that the realization by the biggest money on the planet is that paper promises will go by the way of the dodo bird. You look at all these exchanges throughout the rest of the world, like the Shanghai Metals Exchange, which is largely cash and carry. Give me the money, here's your bar. No futures. They do have a Shanghai Futures Exchange, but it's a very small part. It's more cash and carry. But you look at all the BRICS vault that they're building, the one in Singapore, the one in Dubai, the one in St. Petersburg and in Moscow. They're building all of these exchanges, and they're largely all cash and carry, where the price is set what the price is, not what the futures contract says. And in essence, what the West has been doing for a long time is having the tail wag the dog, where instead of the underlying commodity controlling the futures price, it was the futures price controlling the underlying commodity. And no example is better than in 2020 when the price of oil went to negative $40 a barrel. Well, how the hell does that happen? Well, there was more oil out there in the Gulf of Mexico than people could take in because of COVID, and no one was driving. So we'll pay you $40 to take your oil. That's the futures price setting it, but that's not really what the price is. And so when you have a futures market that can control the price with the click of a mouse and a whole bunch of paper money that overwhelms the real fundamentals, well, that works until it doesn't. And it's beginning to not work because we've lost trust. That's what this is all about. The United States used to be as good as gold until 1971. Every country on the planet could redeem their dollars at a $35 per ounce fixed rate for an ounce of gold. And our currency was as good as gold, and we were trusted and we were revered. And after World War II, we stood on a moral high ground. We helped the world. People wanted to come here to listen to rock and roll and watch movies from Hollywood and wear Levi's jeans and have the American dream. And now all of a sudden they look at this country and say, what the hell happened to that great country? What is going on? Their culture has been whitewashed. They're fiscally irresponsible. They go around the world screwing everything up and sanctioning and using war and bombs and all. We are not viewed the same way anymore. And it breaks my heart because I am a patriot. I thank God every day I was born here. But I have the courage or the stupidity to say, where are we going? And I think the world looks at it that way. And if there's any nobility in what President Trump is doing, I swear to you, I believe he is trying to reshore manufacturing. And by his actions with the Genius Act and with what is going on with gold, I do believe that is what he is trying to do. And it takes about 5 minutes for me to explain that. We can do it another time if you'd like. But the bottom line is simply that we have crossed a line. And you know, my mentor, Richard Russell, used to say 15 years ago, the Fed has two choices, but to inflate or default. When you look at an indebted problem the way that we have, you have three choices. You can hyperinflate, the way that Germany did, hyperinflation in Weimar Republic. You can default, or you can grow your way out of the problem, but we don't make anything. And here comes AI just in time to kneecap half the entry-level jobs. And my son, who works for me now, when he got out of college, was a CPA at Price Waterhouse, getting paid $80,000 a year to analyze the balance sheet of a real estate investment trust. Now, what do you need a kid getting paid $80,000 for to analyze any balance sheet when AI says, done, for free? And so these jobs are going to change. And what you will see is maximum efficiency at the expense of millions of jobs. A K-shaped economy where the rich get much richer and the poor have a hard time putting food on the table because the ability to find good paying jobs will be fewer and further between. So how do you address that? You must bring back manufacturing. If we don't, we're dead. We cannot be reliant upon countries like China for everything from aspirin to aircraft parts and everything in between. We're dead. And when we have we're broke, we're insolvent, we're uneducated, we don't make anything, and here comes AI. If we don't do it, it's game over. And I think that is what he is doing. This is what it is all about, not only with reshoring critical minerals like silver, but also what he is doing, I believe, with gold, which will back the back end of the Treasury market, the Genius Act, the front end, and all of this combined, I can show you, I believe, is an attempt to reshore manufacturing. And he can't say that, but I think that's where he's going. And if I were to lay out the pieces, I think you'd see that. Bottom line is simply this: if we don't, our children and our grandchildren have zero future, zero. And I think it must be done. So it's not going to be fun, just like Andy Dufresne had to crawl through 2 miles of shit to get to the other end in the Shawshank Redemption. So too do we. There is no way out of not paying up the indebtedness that we have accumulated and we continue to accumulate, and still try and be the world reserve currency. It doesn't work. So we can talk about that this time or next time if you'd like, but I will tell you that I do think the central theme whether it be here in the United States or across the globe, is that commodities are worth a whole hell of a lot more than the dollars that are being used to accumulate them. And if you are not a contrarian, you're destined to be a victim. And if you save in dollars, you're going to go broke. That is what I do believe.
You know, it's interesting because Trump always hints subtly at the importance of gold. And I think he had recently tweeted out, maybe not recently, but that, you know, he who owns the gold makes the rules. So they know
Golden art of
this.
negotiating, yeah.
And perhaps they can't explicitly state that out of fear of spooking the markets. But I was going to ask you, do you think that there is some kind of inflection point, some geopolitical event that could be a catalyst for this delivery conundrum that we're in? Could there be a geopolitical crisis somewhere around the world that is the final sort of trigger for that stampede, that final bank run, if you will, into the COMEX and LBMA vaults?
Of course. I mean, whatever you could see in your mind's eye that would trigger a run on either the trust or the solvency of the United States or around the globe. And I mean, if we've learned anything over the last several years, is that things happen that, certainly weren't on our bingo card. Certainly we didn't see coming. If I would have told you in 2019 what was coming for the 4 years after that, you would have bet me everything that you own that not a chance that'll happen. Well, there are a lot of things happening that people, I think, will be surprised about. I think, that's the tough part, is that you can be very well informed and lined up for what you see coming. What triggers said thing is always very difficult to ascertain. And I don't know what it could be. It could be even a false flag event, like we saw World War I. And you could argue, well, I won't even go down that road, but there are a lot of false flags that we've seen, perhaps, that you could say, well, boy, that started something that we didn't see coming. And I will just simply say that to be prepared, because I think we live in a world of probabilities, not certainties. And the probability that we do see something that triggers a rush or a realization, it grows by the day. So, look, I never sold gold and silver, ever, for 36 years to become wealthy. I sell it because it is wealth, that the biggest money in the world is accumulating. And I never sold gold and silver because the sky was falling. I sold it because it was wealth that has outlived everything the world's ever thrown at it, and it's private and it's outside the matrix. We are heading into a digital surveillance state. The culmination of the digital ID and money in the United States that will be part of the Genius Act as of January of next year will all be digital. It's third party, it's not central bank, yet all of it the plumbing runs through the Treasury. So you have the government controlling the on-ramp and the off-ramp. In essence, because it has KYT, know your transaction, KYC, know your client, who you are, what you're buying, in AML, anti-money laundering, where'd you get your money. It is, in essence, a central bank digital currency in a stable coin clothing. You couple that with the digital ID, we are running headlong into a digital surveillance state. So having gold and silver not only gives you protection from monetary and fiscal stupidity, but it also gives you protection, or a little bit of cover, if you will, from what is potentially the foray into a digital world where cash is disappearing, and if you don't have digital ID and the ability to transact money on your iPhone, well, you're probably going to have a hard time buying anything anywhere. I just got back from Vail skiing. Now, Vail owns Whistler up in Canada. Vail owns they own ski resorts in almost every state where there's ski resorts in the United States, up into Canada, one of the biggest corporations in North America, and they're completely cashless. So whether you go to Whistler up in Vancouver or Vail in Colorado, or even Afton Alps in Minnesota, any of these, they're all cashless. You go in there with a $100 bill, you're not going to ski and you're going to starve. But that's what we're seeing, is a move away from dollars and anonymity into a system that is all about digital surveillance, and that's where we're going. So having some gold and silver outside the system is something that I'm a big fan of. And it's maximizing your privacy in a world that is watching it go away, and all legally. So that's something that I think people should understand. It's an asset that is not simultaneously anyone else's liability.
The first mistake that probably 50% of people make when they get into prepping is they run out and they find the cheapest, biggest bucket of so-called emergency food that money can buy. The problem is it usually tastes awful. And I know what you're thinking, Nate, in a disaster situation, I'm gonna rise to the occasion. My palate is formidable. No, it's not. You're not built like that. You're a first worlder just like me. There's a much better solution that your family's gonna love you for. Let's check it out. Would you like some chocolate cake that will last 25 years? How about some vegetables, or some shredded beef, or hundreds of other varieties? Go through the link in the description below and get 15% off the #1 freeze-dried food company in America, the only one that I 100% resolutely endorse, Wholesale Freeze-Dried Foods. Use the coupon code in the description for 15% off.
Yeah, it's interesting because as we see this digitization, as you're talking about, we also see this discouraging people to pursue what is being deemed an archaic relic of the past. And there's this generational exceptionalist view that, now we're entering a new age of digitization and, the Bitcoin and the crypto crowd. We've entered into a new paradigm, if you will, but human psychology remains the same. And while I do think that at some point, maybe 100 years from now, we may be a society that is built on these sort of digital tokens, and that is not tethered to some sort of physical commodity, probably hundreds of years. I do think it's interesting that you're seeing, on the one hand, this, like you say, this surveillance state increasing because of all of the geopolitical stuff going on in the world. And then on the other hand, you're seeing this discouraging of people from going into these hard assets, demonizing it, disparaging it as a relic of the past. And these things are not coincidental, I don't think, is what I'm trying to say.
There is no coincidences at that level. There are none at that level. You're right.
Yeah, so it's, there's also, though, this pop cultural movement towards gold and silver. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Trax NYC.
No.
The guy who goes in, on the streets, and he's got 5 million subs, and he asks people how much a silver coin is worth, and very popular anyways.
Is that the guy that offers a candy bar or a silver coin?
No, he that was kind of like a Mark Dice thing back in the day. This is more of a, he goes out on the street and he asks people, what's the value of this big giant brick of gold? Very popular. And so there does seem to be a little bit of a resurgence. And so if we look on Google Trends, we do see that there's been an uptick in the interest of people Googling things like silver price or gold price. So I guess the question is, if I was looking at this from, okay, is this becoming a bubble? I would be looking at indicators like that to figure out, whether or not the market's getting a little bit hot. And it seems as though there is a trend in that direction, but at the same time, there's this sort of countervailing attempt by the establishment to, just don't look there, right? But I guess best because you're in this industry. What is the sales situation like? Is there more demand than there is selling? Can you give us your appraisal of what's going on?
I mean, we've done a ton of business in the last year and a half, a ton. And we did as much business in the month of January as we did in 4 months last year. We did a third of our entire volume in 1 month this year in January. The volume is insane. And last year was our second biggest year ever in 36 years. But my buddy Rick Rule, who was the CEO of Sprott in the United States, in Carlsbad, California, now he's legendary in the industry. I'm sure you know who he is, and he'll tell you that the amount of gold and gold-related equities, and I mean silver too when I say that, held by the public from Joe and Jane Sixpack to the Harvard Endowment Fund. That's what he always says. The funny thing is, the Harvard Endowment Fund just bought a few $100 million in gold recently, but the Joe and Jane Sixpack up until that point, the allocation of gold and gold-related equities is 0.5%. So it is certainly, while it is becoming a little bit more well-known by just the media talking about it for once, and maybe some Google searches, the public in mass really has very little, if any, exposure to it. The sophisticated traders who are paying close attention to their finances are beginning to notice it. The mainstream, I mean, if you look at, like in last year, you had the largest participation in the history of the stock market by Joe and Jane Sixpack, the retail public, ever into the equity market, about 54% or so. Mm-hmm. You had the largest exposure of options ever by that same public, ever. So they're speculating, and the largest margin exposure ever, $1.5 trillion. So they're speculating on leverage and all in on the market. At the same time, you see much of the institutional traders were selling every single week, 1 to 2 billion a week all year long. You saw, Bezos sell 7 billion in Amazon, Zuckerberg sell, Jamie Dimon sell. You see Warren Buffett with 400 billion in cash, And so, so the institutional traders are leaving as the public is all in, and who's standing for delivery every month for billions and billions and billions? These are the very sophisticated traders. The public doesn't know squat. And I guarantee you.
Well, just to add, but sorry to cut you off, but this Trax NYC guy, when he walks around and offers people gold coins, most people just dismiss him and are completely oblivious to it. But
if anyone would understand it, it would be you, because you're articulate and well-educated and you understand this. You might have friends who you talk to who you've kind of opened their eyes, but go talk to your buddies that you knew since high school. For 30 seconds, if they can talk to you about the virtues of owning gold and silver, I would be shocked. And we're still a long ways away from this being a bubble, not even close. And that's the kind of rhetoric, just like TD Bank saying it's going to 40 and then gets stopped out at 92. It's the rhetoric. It's like the Asian guy where you said earlier, now there's like 12 channels. 1 or 2 of them are legit, like OG John, or OG John AG, the original. I think he's a little bit more legit, but there are a lot of them.
When you say legit, like that there is a known person behind the account?
I don't know who's behind it, but I think the information that they're putting out is far more, like he was the first one to talk about the problems with the refineries before I even figured it out. There's a lot of things that he is saying. I'm in the business. There are a lot of things he is saying that is true. There are some things he's saying that I don't like, leaked memos that never transpire, this and that. But there are other ones out there that are disseminating misinformation, period, such as February 15th, there's a law that goes into effect that we all have to start filing 1099s on all our clients. Not true. Completely not true. Completely false. There are a lot of things that are being said by some of these Asian AI characters that are completely patently false, but there's some that is actually legit. So I don't know what the motivation is behind it, but there is some, I suppose, spin doctoring on both sides to open people's eyes to what truly is happening and to make people, like this coincided, this one came out and said there's this new law that goes into effect right around the time they smashed it to get people to sell. So I think you got to be careful what you listen to, and I think there's greater value listening to you or to me than it is to an AI-generated person who won't show you his face. Although I will say that some of it has been very good. So I don't know if that clears anything up at all, but the Asian AI guys, there's like 12 or 15 channels. The only one that I have found that to me seems to be pretty legit is OG John AG.
Okay, well, I'll have to take a look at that. Speaking of nebulous Asian AI digital simulacrums, Satoshi is also a mysterious Asian guy. What are your thoughts on crypto and how it has emerged kind of in tandem with this transition to a new paradigm? Friends of the channel, Lynette Zhang, have commented on how she thinks that it's perhaps something that was created by the establishment, for lack of better terms. But interestingly, you have BlackRock, the U.S. government, Satoshi, and now MicroStrategies, who's somehow holding on for dear life, literally, are the ones who are cornering the market. So if any of those people sell, it's almost like an immediate death knell for the entire scam, if you want to call it that. What are your thoughts on crypto?
I'm not a crypto guy. I'm really not. However, I am very good friends with Mark Moss. He'll be on our show this week. I'll be on his in a week or two. Natalie Burnell has been on my show a few times. I speak at the XRP conference, or have the last 2 years in a row. I am speaking on Kyle Chase's show tomorrow or the next day, I think, or maybe next week. He's a Bitcoin guy. Because I believe that we both see the world through a similar prism. Now, the only difference is if we're walking in a door, we get into the house for the same reason. We see the inefficiencies, we see the monetary problems, the fiscal problems, we see the problem with, lack of decentralization, too much centralization, power, and all of this stuff. So we see the world the same way. We go in, that's where we diverge. This guy goes to make money, this guy goes to save money. I don't know, you're a little bit younger than I am, but they used to have Reese's peanut butter cup commercials where two people, one would be walking around with a piece of chocolate, another one with a can of peanut butter, and they'd bump into each other. And you put your peanut butter in my chocolate. No, you put your chocolate in my peanut butter. And they would take a bite of it and say, wow, that's great. We're better together. And that's my feeling, is that we should stop being divisive with one another, stop being argumentative with one another. If we both embrace each other and see the benefits, and not only of understanding monetary theory, but of portfolio analytics, of taking some of the profit from crypto, putting it into gold, or taking some of your profit of gold and putting it into Bitcoin. If that's what you want to do, to diversify within the primary trend, I just think it makes our communities stronger. It truly does. And Lynette might be right. I read the white paper on the hashtag that is behind Bitcoin, and it appears as though it was made by the NSA. And could it be a psyop? Sure. It certainly has lost its purity, right? It was supposed to be a peer-to-peer payment system, not being held by the largest hedge fund on the planet, the U.S. government, and MicroStrategies, who I don't know how the hell he's hanging on. But the bottom line is that it is not what it was meant to be. And it has now become very institutionalized. It has become very financialized. And you're right. You see a problem with the stock market, watch how fast Bitcoin collapses, because it is so financialized. And they will throw out the baby with the bathwater if they have to. So what do I think of it? I think that it has raised awareness of why one would want to own gold and silver and why one would want to move away from the dollar. So for that, I'm thankful. What I don't like is the divisiveness and the either or. I think that if we just embraced each other's thoughts and ideologies, I'll tell you this. I have a friend, he's an all-American wrestler, and I used to go to the casino with him all the time. Our families would go on vacations together, big guy, and we'd end up in casinos when we put our kids to bed. And for years, as our kids were growing up, our two families would travel together. And every time we'd leave the casino, this guy would have a pocket full of chips. And I'm like, dude, I've been sitting next to you every trip. I sit next to you for hours. Every time you do this, how the hell are you doing it? Because I don't see you do it. He says, what you don't see is every hand I win, I take a chip and I put it in my pocket. And at the end of the night, no matter what, I'm walking out of here with a pocket full of chips. And that's exactly my thinking, is that if you've made all this money in Bitcoin, put some into gold and silver, make your portfolio stronger, make your understanding of monetary history stronger, and stop being divisive with, your cousin, so to speak, in that we see the world the same way. We're trying to achieve the same thing, and it doesn't need to be an all or nothing. But for me personally, I'm not a crypto guy. I'm more of a guy that wants to hold it and be outside the digital system than not. But I do think
I actually concur with you. I mean, there's so much common ground, with the crypto purists and the desire for some sort of decentralized currency that can't be manipulated. And I think that's a very important point. And I think I would view it as Bitcoin perhaps began as something that was ideal. And since, like most things, gets co-opted by bigger institutions, which of course are trying to position themselves probably to manipulate it in the future. Unfortunately, it's very trackable. There's a lot of things that are antithetical to metals it's more in line with the surveillance state to a certain extent. But there's a place for everything. And another person that we have on the channel frequently, Clem Chambers, talks about how gold is for war and Bitcoin is for flight. And that one of the reasons to have a little bit of Bitcoin is that if you do have to bounce really quickly and you can't transfer a lot of wealth across borders, it can be a little bit tricky unless you have something in like a Swiss vault. If you're that resourceful, it can be difficult. So there is definitely some utility to it. And I think you make a good point there. Now, on the topic of that, I'll just conclude with this, because I'm always ask my guests a prepping question. So what have you done to kind of hedge against potential disasters? Because there always seems to be, when I interview people like yourself, there always seems to be at least some attention to the fact that, things can go wrong because you're in the business of kind of risk management. And do you got like a bug out location, a secret bug out retreat somewhere?
Well, I have a home. My family is in Minnesota, where we have. Yes, the answer is yes. In Minnesota, I live in Florida, where my corporate office is in Minnesota, where we've had it for 36 years. I've lived there for 50 years. I moved to Florida 5 years ago, but COVID woke me up to the whole idea of preparation, having cash on hand, having some small coins on hand, being prepared with, freeze-dried food, always being prepared in every single way, being proficient with firearms and practicing and all of the things that you would need to prepare for in that situation, including, property up in the boondocks way up near Canada,
Don't tell me where. I don't want to dox you here.
Yeah, that's okay. But I mean, the point of it is that, yes, I think it's easy to, too easy to be reactive and not a very good strategy. Being proactive in everything you do, hoping you never need to utilize it. I look at my gold and silver that way. I mean, I hope I never need to use it. If I do, I'm damn glad I have it. And it's not just for an emergency, it's for an opportunity too. If not, I give it to my kids and my grandkids. And I know that in the year 3000, when the dollar bills we call money are hanging from a frame in the Smithsonian as what used to be, gold and silver will still be money. But the same thing should be true about anything that you would need to, whether it be small bills, cash, look at what happened in Cyprus, or food. I'd lived through my first hurricane here in Florida, although it was on the other side. I'm on the East Coast. It was on the Gulf side, two of them. And, the hurricane was nowhere near us. I went to the grocery store 2 days before the residual was going to hit this side. And I'd never seen anything like it. Like growing up in Minnesota, you didn't see anything like that. And every single thing in the meat coolers, for as far as you can see, were gone. Milk was gone. Water was gone. Like, it's not even hitting this side. And so when you realize, to be proactive is always better than reactive. And if you're off, so what? Donate food to a food shelf. Eat it. Use your things that you have put aside and recycle them. But I'm very big on preparation and not full out craziness. But I learned during the pandemic that if you aren't prepared, you're way behind the eight ball.
Well, in the same way that you can have a bank run or you could have a run on the COMEX, everything in our society is built on a just-in-time delivery system. And so if confidence starts to fall apart, that's when the music stops and people realize that there's only so many lifeboats. And so I guess my final question to you be, what keeps you motivated then? Because it must be a logistical nightmare right now. I mean, I ran a business for many years in the prepping industry. And I know that in times of crisis, there's just an immense amount of orders, and it's very stressful. What keeps you motivated? Like, why not just go sip margaritas on a beach?
That's a good question. I mean, in terms of logistics, it's like running a logistics company because everything is overloaded right now. The IRA companies, the custodians, the depositories, FedEx and UPS is challenging. The dealers are overwhelmed. So getting product moving back and forth quickly that you've committed to is challenging. Everything is challenging right now. It's overwhelming. What keeps me motivated? This is something that, I always wrestle with. People say, well, if gold is so great, why are you selling it? It's like, why do you even answer that question? but I think the concept of building something, my company's name is Miles Franklin. My dad's middle name is Miles, and his best friend who lent us 60 grand in 1989 to start a company in an office the size of a closet before the internet, his name was Franklin. We come from nothing. My parents sold their life insurance policies. And, I literally, we come from nothing. And I built something that we've now passed 15 billion in sales without a customer complaint. We are the American dream. And, what keeps me motivated? Doing the right thing. I brought my son into the business. We've been around. My father and I started this 36 years ago. When I started the company, my father said to me, this will kind of answer it for you. He said, look, there's one rule and only one rule. I was 19. He said, you'll buy something every 2 weeks. I don't care if it's just an ounce of silver. You will do that. And it was the greatest gift I've ever been given, to learn the laws of compounding. It looks like you work out in the gym. You didn't do that just by working out since January. You've been doing it for a long time, methodically, regimented. Anything in your life that is important to you and you're good at, you've done over time, right? And the Olympics are going on right now. These kids that are going down the hill doing backflips off the jumps, they didn't just learn this last week. It is about paying yourself first. It is about being regimented and using the compounding of time and effort. Best gift I've ever been given. So for me, it's about understanding that I think I was given the greatest gift ever by my father, and that is to understand the laws of compounding, to understand the laws of paying yourself first, to understand the laws of sound money. And YouTube has changed my life, much like it's changed yours. To be able to talk about the things that you're passionate about. And it just so happens I run a business also. So the thought that those two things need to be mutually exclusive, maybe they are for some people. For me, they're not. They go hand in hand. And it's just a way for me to try and talk about who I am. I don't come across as smart as Peter Schiff, because he is smart, probably smarter than me. I want to come across as being sincere and legit and honest. And that's really all I try to do, because these things change my life. And if I can help people do it, what goes around comes around in life, brother. And that to me is my religion. And I have learned that more than anything. If you are a good person, good things come back to you. If you try and do right, right finds you. If you are an idiot, idiocy finds you. And so I do my best to do the right thing, to run a good business that my kids and my family would be proud of, one that I would be proud of, and to build something that lasts, that helps people. And if everyone wins in that respect, mutual beneficial relationships are what good business is made out of, and that's what I try to do. That's what keeps me motivated. I've been doing it a long time, 36 years, and it's getting harder to stay as motivated. Sometimes I'd rather be out playing golf, but I look back at where I started from and where we've gotten without a customer complaint, 15 billion in sales, starting from an office in the size of a closet with no internet, to where we are now. And it's just something I'm very proud of and want to leave for my kids, who hopefully take the torch. My son is here already, and I have two daughters that I would love to be part of the company, but I guess we'll see where things take us. But appreciate you asking that question, because it's something that means a lot to me. And sincerely, I think if you ever build something and are really good at it, you understand what I'm talking about. And it's just something that I feel very strongly about, is helping as many people as I can, and take that for what it's worth. But it's the honest to God truth.
Well, I mean, that's great advice, in an age of postmodernism and speculation and people just looking for a quick buck. I think sticking to the fundamentals and practicing that discipline of dollar cost averaging in, if you want to call it that, with precious metals and having integrity, I think that's definitely a winning hand. So I want to thank you for coming on today. And where can people find more information about what you do? Do you guys have a YouTube channel now?
Yeah, we do. We started about a year ago. We just crossed 100,000 subscribers recently. Nice. It's Miles Franklin Media is the name of our YouTube channel. Michelle McCory has joined our team as a co-host with me.
She's great.
Yeah, she's an amazing lady, very smart. That's Miles Franklin Media. And if anyone would like our price list, which we keep close to the vest, now we do offer service in Canada, but this is our website here in the United States is milesfranklin.com. You can send us an email at info@milesfranklin.com to request our price list. We only list pricing on our U.S. website up to 10 grand. Our prices will not be beat. We will not be undersold. We've never had a customer complaint ever. Your people won't be the first, but if they put it into info@milesfranklin, send us an email. Any questions they heard here, we'll expand upon. If you just want the price list without being contacted, great. We'll get right back to you with that. And then our partners in Canada are mfbullion.ca for those in Canada that want to buy metals second to none, and mfbullion.ca in Canada, milesfranklin.com in the U.S., and info@milesfranklin for our price list in the U.S. or any questions you heard here, and Miles Franklin Media on YouTube.
Good stuff, man. Well, I'm looking forward to the YouTube channel. There's so much noise that I wasn't even aware that you had a YouTube channel. I always see you on podcasts, but it's good to know. So I'll definitely be dropping that in the description below. And yeah, thanks for coming out, and we hope to speak to you again in the future.
I would love to come back on. You seem to get it. You're very smart. I really appreciate the invite, and I look forward to picking up where we left off. But until then, not only will I be looking forward to it, I hope you and everyone else stays well.
All right. Well, take care, man. My head's really big now, so I gotta I gotta go. All right, you take care.
See you, brother.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.